let's take a look at the problem with Jon Stewart. Now, we tend to try and keep these segments to about 20 to 25 minutes, so I can't go through all of the problems with Jon Stewart, or else we would need to be here all day and possibly even longer and go on a number of history lessons as well. Right. But Jon Stewart has gone viral again recently because this happens every so often. His show, The Problem with Jon Stewart, seems to attract controversy, which is exactly what it's designed to do, especially after that recent segment that happened last year where he talked about the problem with white people. Very telling, that, wasn't it? The problem with white people is essentially that they have their own history, they have their own culture, and occasionally black people and brown people don't live up to the standards of those cultures. So we must flip around the entire structure of society to make sure that black and brown people are winning all the time in every circumstance, which is not necessarily something that I support, being that I generally support this thing called meritocracy.
Radical notion.
I know, insane, isn't it? But this time he's been caught out, not caught out, he's gone viral talking about gun rights, gun laws, what should be done about the Second Amendment, drag queen story hour again, all as part of a conversation he had with a Oklahoma state senator called Nathan Dam, which must be one of the most American names I've ever heard in my life. Nate Dam! That sounds like an exclamation that you do after whipping a bull and firing your pistols into the air, doesn't it?
Freedom, yeah.
Yes, freedom, and bald eagle flies past majestically. Oh, it brings a tear to my eye.
I like the imagery.
Yes, as do I. But before I get into it, I would like to remind everybody of an article that I wrote quite a long time ago, actually, at the end of December 2021, talking about Britain's aversion to self-defense, which could be retitled How Britain Lost Its Gun Rights. Because remember, when we open up avenues for these sorts of conversations, especially you in the US, which is protected somewhat, it's a bit flimsy at the moment, but you are still somewhat protected by your Second Amendment, that it's very, very easy to let all of your rights slip away one by one step at a time, one moral outrage or moral panic, one after the other, especially when we start to talk about, think of the children. Now, children are very important. We should do as much as we can to protect children, but Jon Stewart and others advocating to repeal gun laws, add more gun laws and restrictions so that they're able to take away more people's guns is not going to protect more children. And I will get into the exact reasons why. So if you want to learn about how England and Britain lost their gun laws, check out this article. I am still very happy with it. So let's move on. So this was a recent segment from The Problem with Jon Stewart, which was supposedly from the March 3rd episode. If we go to the next link, please, John, just to highlight it for everyone. So the episode was called Chaos, Law and Order. And this was an interview that he did with the state senator, Nathan Dam, which was only about 8 minutes of the entire show. As you can imagine, heavily edited, to the point where Dam himself has been a little bit annoyed at how they edited it to make him look bad. He did say that Stewart was very polite to him before and after the interview.
You should be very leery about doing anything pre-recorded. It should normally just always be live.
Well, supposedly it went on for about an hour and a half, and only 8 minutes long, but they got onto a number of subjects. Including, like I said, the Second Amendment, gun rights, gun violence, drag queen story hour, and such. But there is one particular clip of it which has been going around, which Oren McIntyre and others have been highlighting here. Oren gives his nice little rundown of what's going on rhetorically, but let's watch the clip first, and then we can analyse it from there.
Even rights have responsibilities, and that within those responsibilities are responsibilities and order, otherwise it's chaotic. I'll go you one further. You want to ban drag show readings to children.
To minors, yes.
Why?
Why?
What are you protecting?
Why can we prohibit children from voting, those under 18 from voting?
Why are you banning
that?
Is that free speech? Are you infringing on that performer's free speech?
They can continue to exercise their free speech, just not in front of a child.
Why?
Because the government does have a responsibility to protect.
I'm sorry?
The government does have a responsibility in certain instances to protect children.
What's the leading cause of death amongst children in this country? And I'm going to give you a hint. It's not drag show readings to children.
Correct, yes.
So what is it?
I'm presuming you're going to say it's firearms.
No, I'm not going to say it like it's an opinion. That's what it is. It's firearms. More than cancer, more than car accidents. And what you're telling me is you don't mind infringing free speech to protect children from this amorphous thing that you think of. But when it comes to children that have died, you don't give a flying fuck to stop that, because that shall not be infringed. That is hypocrisy at its highest order.
Oh, Nathan, that was an easy one.
That was an easy one. You are right that he should have said abortion because...
Well, and also he should have made a point about where those children are dying. They're dying in cities where guns have already been banned.
Well, no, that's the thing. There's that, and also he should have asked the question, and that's where I'm going to get on. Who exactly is it killing these children? Because Jon Stewart would not be particularly happy about the answer. And we'll take a look at his response to when people have suggested solutions for these problems.
Oh, right. Okay.
What his solutions to these problems would be. But so, yes, I do have some questions for Jon. Oron gives a good point here, which is just it was a complete pivot. It was just a complete rhetorical tactic to make it look like he'd won the argument.
Nathan should have handled that better, though.
Well, he might have done, but they might have just edited it out. So
point.
there's no way of really being able to tell without seeing the full hour and a half released to everybody. Personally, I wouldn't agree to do an interview with somebody like Jon Stewart, especially on his show, because it is not designed to be bipartisan. It's not designed to be unbiased and fair.
I'd do an interview with him on my show. I'd do an interview with him.
Oh, that would be very interesting. Yeah, I would love to see that, but I'm not one of those sorts of people like some others. Even Callum and Carl have mentioned in the past. Oh, Jon Stewart, he used to be all right. He used to be good. I have never once seen a clip of Jon Stewart where he's been anything other than a smarmy, smug bastard liar.
I vaguely remember him from the 90s, and he seemed all right then, but he didn't...
Well, it seems to me, from the clips that I've seen, that in the past, he had generally the same worldview and talking points. He just wasn't quite as blatant with them, possibly because the culture wasn't ready yet for it, or possibly because the majority of people hadn't seen through the veil of boomer truth as much as they have currently. But no, Jon Stewart is not somebody who I think has ever been good. I look from the clips that I've seen. If you would like to correct me on this, leave some clips down below. You know, he might have said some things about, the US shouldn't have been in the Iraq War. Oh, congratulations! Wow, that's a real radical position that you've taken out. But I've got some questions for Jon, which is that what demographics are those that are causing the incredible amount of gun deaths in the US? And that was so shocking, that question is to almost take Dan off his seat.
Yep.
Yes, contain your excitement from this.
I've sat back upright. What are the demographics?
Well, we'll take a look into that. And if these communities happen to be mainly people, these demographics of marginalised backgrounds, shall we say, what should be done about what tactics should be taken to reduce the level of gun crime in these communities, perhaps? But we'll take a look into that in a moment. So this seems to be part of the references that are going across, the studies that are going across, saying that gun violence is now the #1 leading cause of child mortality in the US. This isn't
abortion.
After abortion, but they would never count that because they don't see fetuses as actual living creatures or children. But so this is one of many studies that were done that just said 2020, that's the most recent year we've got this data from. I think the FBI was going to start releasing data on gun violence in 2021, but decided not to.
I can imagine they might be somewhat reticent.
Yes, they would be a little bit hesitant to do so, but they said firearms were the #1 cause of death for children ages 1 to 19 in the United States, taking the lives of 4,357 children. The spike in 2020 child firearm deaths in the US was primarily driven by an increase in gun assault deaths. I mean, stating the obvious there. Child firearm assault mortality rate reached a high in 2020 with a rate of 3.6 per 100,000, 39% increase from the year before. No mention of causes or anything like that, and you'll notice that Jon Stewart was very, very clear to avoid causes or mention anything other than just the one talking point that he can use to throw at Republicans who like guns because they can keep people safe.
I have such a clear sense in my mind where you're going to take this.
You're absolutely right. And Time and other such publications were reporting on this as well. And Time, respect to them, mentioned one of the things that you're not supposed to notice, only in passing, but they did. If we go to the next one, they say in this article, though this breakdown did not have any racial demographic information, other studies show that black and brown children are typically more exposed to gun violence than white children are.
No.
I know. Big shock. I thought that it was the melting pot. Bring me, you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor, and then everyone just becomes, they get their passport, they get their green card, and you're American.
It's been a long time since I've taken a proper look at, well, apart from another segment that's possibly coming up soon, but
perhaps.
But when I've sort of last looked into these numbers in any great detail, if you remove a certain 5 Democrat cities, the picture does change quite remarkably.
It is. Well, we'll get onto. I imagine we'll get onto some of those Democrat-run cities as we go further. And this next one in Forbes, who are more likely to talk about such things than Time, but still mainstream news source. So I was surprised to find them break the information down so nicely. So this one, they looked at the CDC study that was published in the journal JAMA Pediatrics analysed over 38,000 homicide victims under 17 years old between 1999 and 2020. Rates increased significantly among several demographics, including boys, 6 to 10-year-olds, 11 to 15-year-olds, and black children and Hispanic children. Primarily, but that's not the only thing they found. They found that the study noted that of the victims, 69.4% were male. I mean, this is all typical information that we know. While some rates did decline, including rates for girls, infants, 1 to 5-year-olds, Asian or Pacific Islander children, and white children and children of the Northeast, which... Children in the Northeast, white children, there's a lot of overlap there, as far as I'm aware of how the demographic structure of America is.
Roughly what I understand, yes.
Yes, and that's not something, once again, that you hear Jon Stewart mention. He just wants his catchy anti-Second Amendment talking points, despite the fact in the interview, if you watch the full 8 minutes, he does say, I support the Second Amendment. You're not really convincing me on that one, John. Seeing as every time you bring up the Second Amendment, you bring up how you need to restrict it, and then you bring up these out-of-context bits of data to throw at people.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that the children killed by this were not killed by legally owned firearms purchased in the regular manner.
Probably not.
No. More likely, doesn't it?
And once again, if it's white people shooting these black children out of just a sense of post-colonial violence and
I think
wanting
we
to
might have heard about those case studies.
We might have. I know that from the clips that I've been seeing passed around on social media recently, when it comes to interracial violence, it's typically not white on black.
That would chime with the figures I've seen, certainly.
Yes. Yes, and everybody knows this. We say this like we're saying it like it's some surreptitious, like little cheeky thing. Oh, aren't we naughty saying this? Everybody knows this. Yes. Everybody knows it. If you even go on websites like this one, American Progress, and with a name like that, you know exactly the position that this magazine or website or whatever they are is taking. They are progressives, they are leftists, and they talk about it. Gun violence disproportionately and overwhelmingly hurts communities of colours. But they only ever talk about it from one perspective, which we can see just highlighted in that headline, in the subline there, the lack of investment. Lack of investment in communities of colours, coupled with weak gun laws. Okay, who would be enforcing those gun laws, I wonder? And what is the status of those people when they go into those neighbourhoods?
So presumably, what, guns are encouraged in places like Chicago, or are they completely outright?
I think what it is less Gibbs equals more deaths. Yes. That's the equation that we're working with here. On the moral calculator, less Gibbs, less reparations, more deaths.
Effectively.
Pay me. Have you watched Blazing Saddles?
No, but I think that I should.
It's a very funny film, but there's a great scene near the beginning, because obviously it's set in the Wild West, it's a satirical comedy. They get sent the black sheriff, and it's an incredibly racist neighborhood, or little town in the middle of the desert of nowhere. Right. They all pull their guns on him the second they realize, oh, this is the guy who's going to be the new sheriff. So in response, he pulls a gun on himself. Freeze, or the N gets it, and then everybody puts their guns down in shock. Oh, good God, he might just be crazy enough to do it. That's what they're doing here. They're holding the gun to their own heads, saying, give me more money. Give me more money, or I'll do it. And all of the people in legislation in the government are going, he might be crazy enough to do it, guys. He might be, we need to start considering this reparation. And they say, carrying on in the article, gun violence has a disproportionate impact on racial and ethnic minorities. It's highly concentrated in a small number of neighbourhoods that have historically been under-resourced and racially segregated. So this is probably lining up with some of the things that you were referring to. This is due to a combination, once again, they like to reinforce it over and over again, of weak gun laws, systemic racial inequalities, including unequal access to safe housing and adequate educational and employment opportunities, and the history of disinvestment in public infrastructure and services in the communities of colour most affected by gun violence. Now, does that ring true to you? You mentioned Thomas Sowell in the last segment. He has made lots of comments on such things.
Oh, he is masterful on this subject. Absolutely masterful.
He is excellent. Does that ring true to the what you've heard and what you've read on such things?
Yes. That quote that we mentioned there was Thomas Sowell. He says, "People will forgive you for being wrong, but they will never forgive you for being right, especially when you being right proves them wrong."
Yes, and Thomas Sowell has done a lot to point out that many other communities that come from, you could say, underprivileged backgrounds, immigrants coming from China, a lot of East Asians coming over to America, they start out just as impoverished as many of these black communities, and yet you don't see anywhere near the same levels of violence or gun
No, you
crimes
don't.
or
In fact,
anything.
in fact, I believe Indian Americans, which is spots not feathers, different types.
Yeah.
I don't know how they what the nomenclature is, but people from India who are now living in America, I believe, are the most successful demographic. I can't speak with the highest household income per capita, and they've obviously come in as immigrants, and the same with other Asian communities. Again, relatively low crime, started quite impoverished, and yet doing quite well for themselves. From what I understand.
Generally, within one or two generations, they'll have taken themselves up from absolute poverty within these ghettos into being able to move into generally quite affluent neighbourhoods.
So it can be done.
Yeah, it's all about. Thomas Sowell puts it forward as it's all about work ethic and the culture of these particular demographics. And he always points out that the black demographics, their culture is a particularly harmful one because they have a weird twisted form of honor culture where it's all about how many women you can get and how many people you've killed. And you've all listened to rap music at home. You know the sorts of things that they're talking about.
Yeah.
That's just day-to-day life in a lot of these neighborhoods. And the solution is never the obvious one, because personally what I would do, send the police in. Police these neighborhoods a bit more thoroughly. That's what I would suggest. That's generally what works and has been proven to work, but apparently that's racist.
It's not the solution that they want, though.
No.
I don't think that America can have the policing that it wants with the demographics that it has.
They want Gibbs.
Yeah.
They want Gibbs.
I mean, speaking of Thomas Sowell, I'm thinking of doing a Brokenomics basically just on Thomas Sowell because he's so sound
excellent
on all of this stuff. The difficulty would be just trying to compress down his soundness into just one episode.
Yeah, he's got so much work to go through. But going from somebody like Thomas Sowell, I'm going to reference somebody else as well, who you may not associate in the same league as Thomas Sowell, but I think is an intellectual of his time, which is Carl Pilkington.
Okay, fair enough.
You've watched An Idiot Abroad, I assume.
Well, I don't watch any TV, but I have seen a couple of clips of him asking strange questions while being abroad.
He's very entertaining. But
Yes.
An Idiot Abroad was obviously, send average Mancunian across the world, record his reactions to everything.
Yes.
You've got a great TV show. Ricky Gervais, very smart in doing so. But in one of the episodes, he goes to the US. And he's driven around by a very large and affable black man around a ghetto neighborhood. I think it's in Compton. And is shown a drive-through funeral parlor, which is not something that I had ever heard of before watching that show.
So you don't even have to get out of the car. You just
No, you just drive up. There's a big window. It's like a McDonald's drive-through, except you don't order anything. There's just a window. Through that window, there is a room, oftentimes with a seat in the corner where you'll see the mother of a young man weeping, and they have a casket, and they'll have the body there, and you can just drive up, presumably.
Oh, thank God you don't need to have the dead body in the passenger seat or anything. And just
No, you don't drop them off.
Right, I see. Okay.
You're not dropping off.
I mean, this is still bad, but not quite as bad as I first assumed.
No, I
but
can
right.
understand where your mind jumped to there, but no, you can drive up and you can presumably honk your horn, drink something and pay,
bud, yes.
have a bud, and then pay your respects, and then drive off and let the cousins in the car behind you drive up and do the same thing. Very strange. And I decided just as a little thought experiment, I thought not even a thought experiment, just to look at some figures as to where these places mainly are. And if we go to the next one, tell me if you notice any patterns between these areas. Okay, so they mainly pop up in Atlanta, Georgia.
Right. So in a Democrat city with a crime problem. Yeah.
Memphis, Tennessee.
It's Democrat city, isn't it?
Yep.
Right.
Compton in California.
Oh, that's a
That's definitely Democrat. Yep.
Okay.
Saginaw, Michigan, which I'm not
Never heard of it.
too familiar with, but I'd be willing to bet heavy Democrat. And I looked into the population; it's about 50% black. So
it will be Democrat. Then.
yeah, so it will be Democrat, judging by voting patterns. And then Chicago,
the
Illinois.
legendary Chicago.
Yes, the legendary Chicago South Side is where most of these places pop up. So. Once again, there is a pattern here.
Yes.
And the pattern also goes to, like we say, the voting patterns, the Democrats who want to defund the police. And
I would imagine that all of these cities have quite strict gun laws as well.
Yes, and they want to be
suggesting that people who breach gun laws by shooting people do not also breach them when they acquire them in the first place.
No, but they definitely don't want to enforce policing in particular neighborhoods in those places, and the people who govern those places are very, very, I'll say, kind on crime. I think that's a good way of putting it. They're very kind on crime. All of those people causing the overwhelming demand for drive-through funerals, they're all just a Robin Hood of some form or another. There's no other explanation for it. But what's Jon Stewart's opinion on policing these neighbourhoods? Because I decided there's this this news, because we can always trust them for excellent reporting, all the way from 2020 during the George Floyd riots, protests, the Summer of Floyd. They just decided to ask, or at least got clips from this interview where somebody said, where do you stand on calls for defunding the police, which would only benefit these communities, I can assume. Let's see his response.
Yeah.
I'm wondering where you stand on calls for defunding the police.
You know, it's hard for me to answer it without the context of the whole thing. What I do think is we built a segregated system and we built it up for 400 years. And just because we said it was over wasn't enough, we have to dismantle it in the same way that, with the same effort and the same vehemence that we built it.
So just dismantle it. We built up the system, so we need to dismantle it because it negatively impacts them.
Well, I mean, I guess they are.
So, John, the very fact that you can then throw in the faces of somebody who's saying, hey, drag queen story hour might not be good for kids, and then you can throw figures in the face of him saying, well, actually, guns that you support are what's killing kids across the US, even though those two subjects are completely unrelated from one another. He's not saying that drag queen story hours, literally, you sit on the drag queen's knee and then presumably they stab you repeated times until you die. I don't think
they just rub themselves all over you while wearing a bikini.
Yeah, exactly. Much more wholesome, maybe. Yes. No. Yeah, he's not saying any, you bring this up, and then when you actually look into the figures and you look into the details of what's causing this uptick in crimes, gun crimes against children, and you look at the solutions, you have no solutions because you do not care about making people's lives better. Because we bring up these neighbourhoods, the people in these neighbourhoods are not all going to be the same. They're not all going to be the ones committing these crimes. In fact, a lot of them are probably going to be upstanding and relatively honest.
Oh, no, they are by far and away the victims.
Yeah, they're the victims of their own neighbourhoods. Yeah. And the fact that you are out there, the fact that you are out there supporting legislation and supporting movements that actively help to victimize the people in these neighborhoods is why you are a smarmy, slimy scumbag, and that is only one of the problems with Jon Stewart.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Contemplation series, this episode on the limitations of science. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.